A little girl whispers a secret that shatters everything. There's a camera in your office. Hours later, a millionaire watches the woman he loves betray him on screen. If you're drawn to inspirational stories with truth hidden in silence, you won't want to miss this. Where in the world are you watching from, and what time of day is it right now? Iris Lawrence had learned from a very young age that silence often kept her safe. In the first 3 foster homes she cycled through, speaking too soon or too boldly had led to consequences, sometimes confusion, sometimes coldness, sometimes punishment. Watching, however, had taught her things. It had taught her how to tell which adults meant what they said and which ones only smiled because they were supposed to. Watching had shown her who listened and who only waited for their turn to talk. Now, standing in the doorway of Albert Lawrence's home office, 8-year-old Iris was watching again. And this time, something was wrong. The room was dim except for the soft blue glow of the computer screen reflecting off Albert's glasses. The late afternoon sun filtered in through the tall windows, casting shadows across the oak-paneled floors and expensive furniture. The man behind the desk sat upright, his shoulders slightly hunched, speaking into a headset about system redundancies, firewall layers, and encrypted endpoints. His tone was even confident but impersonal. Like always, to most people, Albert Lawrence was a cybersecurity genius founder and CEO of a firm whose algorithms protected half of Silicon Valley. To Iris, he was the man who had taken her in 6 months ago and given her a room with her name on the door, a tablet with every educational app available, and a kitchen that never ran out of cereal. He had done everything by the book, but he hadn't seen her. Not really. She stood quietly just inside the frame of the doorway, her small hand brushing the wood trim. Her feet didn't quite touch the floor the same way the adults did. She wasn't loud enough, tall enough, or assertive enough to be heard without asking for it. She had been standing there for several minutes now, waiting for him to pause his work to notice her to look. But his focus stayed locked on the monitors in front of him, his fingers tapping at speeds she couldn't follow. His voice was steady as he discussed server breaches and security patches with a group of faceless executives on the other end of the call. She shifted her weight from foot to foot. She didn't like interrupting, especially not him. But this wasn't something she could ignore. She had first noticed it 3 nights ago, and then again the next. A tiny, irregular blink coming from behind the frame painting on the far wall. It wasn't part of the house's smart system. She had checked. Late at night when she couldn't sleep, and she often couldn't, she would use her tablet to scan for unfamiliar signals. It was something she'd taught herself to do after overhearing Albert work on router configurations, a way to pass the time in a house that, despite its size and beauty, still didn't feel like home. That blinking light had returned night after night, quiet, almost invisible. But not to her. It wasn't just the light. It was the feeling that someone had placed something where it shouldn't be, something watching. The painting was new, an oil landscape of a meadow, all wildflowers and golden sky. Lilybell Albert's girlfriend had brought it over a month ago. Every room needs a little warmth. She had said her smile as polished as the jewelry she wore, even when she claimed she hated being flashy. She had hung the painting herself, insisting it livened up the otherwise minimalist office. Iris remembered how careful she had been, how precisely she positioned it, as if she were doing more than decorating. Iris took a small step forward. Her stomach tightened. Her voice stayed inside her for a moment longer. She reached out and gently tugged the edge of Albert's sleeve. He held up one finger without looking at her, the universal adult gesture for wait. She hesitated. Then she tugged again, slightly firmer this time. "Just a second, sweetheart," he murmured, still focused on his call. That was usually the end of the conversation. But not this time. Iris leaned in closer, her face near his shoulder, her voice low. "There's a camera in your office," she whispered, "but it's not yours." The reaction was instant. Albert's hands froze above the keyboard, his shoulders straightened, his jaw tightened. For a beat, he didn't speak at all. The conversation on the headset continued. Someone was outlining quarterly projections, but he wasn't listening. His hand moved to the mouse, then stopped. Slowly, he reached up and removed the headset. "I need to call you back," he said into the mic. Then he clicked off the call without waiting for a response. The room went quiet. He turned toward her, really turned. His eyes finally met hers, and they were not distracted now. There was focus there. Surprise, maybe even concern. "What did you say?" he asked. Iris hesitated, then repeated herself. "There's a camera in your office, behind the painting. It blinks at night when you're not in here." Albert looked at the painting. His face didn't show much, but she noticed his throat tighten as he swallowed. "How do you know that?" he asked, softer this time. "I check signals," she said. "I use my tablet when I can't sleep." He looked at her for a long second, as if trying to figure out how seriously to take her. She could see him sorting through possibilities. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe it was a smart, light reflection. Maybe she imagined it. But then she reached into the hallway, picked up the tablet she had left on the table, and turned it on. Her fingers moved fast and confidently across the screen. Within seconds, she opened an app, one he didn't recognize immediately. The interface displayed a digital map of the house's network. "These are our devices," she said, pointing. "Your laptop, the door sensors, the smart lights. These here," she pointed to a small red cluster near the office, "aren't on the network, but they're broadcasting." Albert leaned forward. "Where is that coming from?" "That one's behind the painting," she answered. "It started showing up after Lilybell gave it to you." He didn't respond right away. She noticed his hands curling slightly, his fingers pressing into his palm. "And how long have you been seeing this?" "Since she hung it up." The silence between them deepened. He sat back slowly, his eyes still on the tablet. His mind was running. She could see it happening behind his eyes. Albert Lawrence was a man who lived by logic, by data, by verifiable threats. Feelings didn't move him. Evidence did. She had just given him evidence. He looked back at her, his expression unreadable but not cold. "Not this time." "Iris," he said, and it was the first time he'd said her name that way, like it belonged to someone he saw clearly. "I need you to show me everything you've seen." She nodded. No smile this time, but something in her shoulders loosened just a little. He stood and walked to the painting. She followed him. They both stared at the frame for a long moment, neither one speaking. Then Albert reached for the edge and gently lifted it from the wall. And there it was, a tiny black device no bigger than a thumb drive tucked behind the frame and fixed against the wall. Almost invisible. Silent. Watching. Albert's face changed. Not dramatically, but enough. The corners of his mouth tightened. His brow creased just slightly. Iris saw it all. And for the first time since she arrived in this house, she felt something shift, not outside of her, but in the space between them. Respect, maybe even trust, and behind that something heavier. Because if this camera was real, if it was here in his office, then someone had put it there. Albert Lawrence stood still, the small black device resting in his hand like a foreign object pulled from the walls of his own life. It was smaller than he expected, thinner than a pencil, barely thicker than a coin, but somehow heavier than anything he had touched that day. The weight wasn't in the plastic casing or the circuits, it was in what it meant. He turned it over once, his fingers slow, methodical, but his mind was already moving faster than he could keep up with. Questions started to form like cracks across a sheet of glass. How had it gotten here? Who put it there? What had it already seen? And more importantly, why hadn't he noticed it first? That last one cut deep. He was the security expert, the man who built a company on tracking the invisible, on catching the things others missed. And yet it was Iris, 8 years old, barely speaking above a whisper, who had seen what he hadn't. Later that evening, after Iris had gone to her room and the office door was closed again, Albert sat at his desk but didn't turn on the computer. The screen stayed dark. So did the rest of the room, aside from the faint amber light from the hallway seeping through the doorframe. His eyes drifted back to the blank space on the wall where the painting had been. It was strange how quickly beauty could turn into suspicion. A field of wildflowers, golden sun, breaking through lavender skies. It had seemed harmless when Lilybell first brought it in. More than harmless, it had seemed thoughtful. A softening touch in a room that was all metal and function. She had hung it herself, smiling while she worked, brushing imaginary dust from the frame before stepping back and tilting her head like an artist evaluating her own masterpiece. He remembered standing a few feet away, coffee in hand, distracted but grateful. She had kissed him on the cheek that day. Now that memory sat sour in his stomach. He tried to recall if anything felt off at the time, but nothing did. Lilybell was always perfect. She was where she needed to be, said what needed to be said, brought wine on stressful evenings, and homemade soup when he worked too late. She was intuitive, and in a life full of metrics and logic, her warmth had felt like balance. Maybe too perfect, he thought now, too polished. And yet, even with the evidence in his hand, doubt still made room in his chest. He didn't want to believe she was behind it. He didn't want to see her that way. He wanted the painting to be a coincidence, the blinking light, A malfunction, the camera, an old leftover from a renovation or a previous tenant. Anything but what it might actually be. The next morning, Lilybell arrived just after 9. She had a paper bag of fresh croissants from the French bakery downtown, the one Iris liked. She brought coffee, too, the way Albert took it, no sugar, one splash of oat milk, not stirred. She wore a cream blouse tucked into high-waisted slacks, her hair pulled back in a neat low bun. Elegant, effortless as always. She smiled when she walked into the kitchen, her heels clicking softly on the tile. I ran into Evelyn outside, she said, cheerfully, placing the pastries on the table. She was trimming the rosemary bush again. That woman takes her herbs seriously. Albert forced a smile. She's good at what she does. Lilybell leaned in and kissed his cheek, just as she always did, but this time he didn't lean into it. He noticed how she paused a half-second longer than usual, as if waiting to feel something different, then quickly recovered. I thought we could sit for a bit, she said. You've been working non-stop, and I know you have that investor call later. Albert nodded. I might need to check some things in the office first. She didn't flinch. Of course. Want me to bring you your coffee there? No, he replied a little too fast. Thanks. I've got it. She tilted her head slightly the way she always did when something didn't line up. It was subtle, but he noticed it now because he was looking for it. She stepped back, smiled again, and turned toward the refrigerator to pour juice. Iris had slipped in at some point during the exchange, quiet as ever, her backpack already on. She stood near the table watching them both. Lilybell turned toward her. Good morning, sweetheart, she said. I brought your favorite, raspberry jam and those flaky layers you like. Iris didn't move. Thank you, she said, voice flat. You look serious today, Lilybell said with a chuckle. Got a big test? No, Iris answered. Just thinking. Albert watched the interaction closely. The way Lilybell smiled, the way Iris didn't. There was something unspoken passing between them, and he didn't know what it was, but he didn't like it. Later that afternoon, Albert found himself standing outside his own office door, staring at the handle. He keyed in his access code slowly, deliberately. As the lock clicked open, he glanced over his shoulder. Just a reflex, he told himself, but a part of him wondered if someone was watching. The room was exactly how he left it, except the space where the painting had been now felt more like a scar than a blank wall. He checked the rest of the office. No signs of disturbance, no other devices. He opened the drawers, ran a signal scan, checked the power outlets. Nothing else showed up, but his gut told him the camera wasn't alone. It was never just one. That evening, after Iris had gone to bed and the house was quiet again, Albert sat on the edge of the couch while Lilybell read beside him. She was reading a mystery novel, or at least pretending to. Her eyes moved, but they didn't linger long on any page. I've been thinking, Albert said, keeping his tone neutral. She looked up. About what? That painting you gave me, he said. The one for my office. Her expression didn't change. What about it? Where did you get it? She smiled gently. A gallery in Santa Monica. Why no reason? He said. It just felt deliberate. The placement, I mean. I thought it needed something, she said. That room's always felt cold. I just wanted to warm it up. He nodded slowly. Did you ever change anything in there? Like move anything around? Her smile tightened just a bit. Of course not. You know how particular you are about that space. He looked at her for a long second, and she held his gaze, easily, unblinking. Iris said she saw something blinking behind the painting, he said carefully. There was the smallest flicker in Lilybell's expression. A microsecond. A shift in the corner of her mouth, but then it was gone. She's an imaginative girl, Lilybell replied, reaching for her tea. You know how kids are. Albert said nothing. He just watched her, and for the first time her calm started to look like calculation. That night, as he turned off the lights and checked the locks, Albert realized something else. He didn't want to believe Lilybell was lying, but what he wanted didn't matter. The facts were beginning to stack, and denial was starting to cost him more than he could afford. What worried him most wasn't just that a camera had been in his office, it was that it had been there so long, and the only reason he knew about it at all was because of a little girl who had once been afraid to speak. Albert sat in his office that evening, the walls once again silent, the air too still, as if even the house had started holding its breath. Outside the window, dusk had crept in without warning. The sky was the color of wet stone, and the old oak outside his study swayed gently, without sound. His desk was tidy as usual, papers stacked, keyboard clean, no distractions. except for what lay at the center, a hand-drawn network map penciled neatly on white printer paper, each line carefully measured, each dot precisely marked. At the bottom, in small, deliberate letters, it read Iris. No date, no signature, but no mistaking who had made it. He picked it up for the third time in 10 minutes. It was her handwriting. He recognized the tight square lettering. He had seen it once before when she wrote her own name on a label for a school science fair project, but that day she didn't speak. She had just handed it to him and stepped back. She hadn't even waited to see if he would read it. And now the same silence echoed in this drawing. There were 4 red dots circled on the map, each labeled office, garage, living room, bedroom. She had used a red pen, but only to mark the unknowns. The rest was sketched in pencil. The signal strength access points, even timestamps, all tracked by hand. No software, just pure observation. Albert rubbed his temples, unsure whether to be impressed or concerned. The precision was undeniable. Her spatial accuracy matched professional network diagnostics. But what did it mean for an 8-year-old to be this vigilant? What had made her look in the first place? What had made her keep looking? Iris stood outside the door, not knocking. Her arms were folded tight across her chest, fingers curled under her sleeves. She knew he was in there. She could see the light under the door, but she didn't want to interrupt, or rather, she didn't want to have to guess whether her interruption would be welcome. That was the game now, guessing. She had tried speaking up before, and he had listened technically, but he hadn't said much back. She had learned over time that silence could mean many things. With some adults, it meant patience. With Albert, it meant something closer to distance. Not rejection exactly, but like standing behind glass. Finally, the door clicked open. Albert stood there, the drawing in one hand, his expression unreadable. "Did you make this?" Iris nodded when she looked up, but not all the way into his eyes. "Been watching since I got here. It started blinking 2 months ago. Then again, a week later, I logged it." Albert raised an eyebrow, turning the paper slightly. "You logged it." Iris reached into her hoodie pocket and pulled out a smaller sheet of graph paper. On it, multiple dates and times were recorded, columns labeled room, signal strength, activity, and notes like quiet for 3 days or strong spike midnight. Her handwriting was smaller here, focused. Albert took the sheet gently. He scanned it, blinking slowly. "This is very detailed." She didn't smile. She just looked at him and waited. "You did all of this on your own." She nodded. Nobody else noticed. He felt the weight of those words heavier than anything on the paper. Nobody else noticed. He cleared his throat. "Did you tell Llewellyn?" Iris shook her head. "Not until I was sure. She cleans the rooms, but she doesn't know network stuff." Albert tried to hide his reaction. He felt like he was staring at something fragile and indestructible at the same time. This wasn't a kid's guesswork. This was surveillance, recognition, pattern analysis, organized paranoia, and maybe he realized a little survival instinct too. He turned and walked back into the office, Iris trailing behind. She stood near the door, not assuming an invitation, but not walking away either. Albert tapped a few keys on his computer. No anomalies. His tools weren't picking up what she had, or maybe they had been configured not to. That thought sent a chill down his spine. He turned to her again. "You said you've been tracking this since the beginning." She nodded. "Why didn't you say anything earlier?" She hesitated. Then with that same steady voice, she said, "I thought you already knew, or that you didn't care." He blinked. "Why would I not care?" She looked away. "Because you didn't ask. About anything." The words hit harder than expected. Albert opened his mouth, then closed it. There was a pause, too long for comfort. Finally, he said, "I should have. I didn't know how." Iris said nothing. He could see she was trying to decide whether to believe him, whether that line was sincere or just one more adult excuse. He looked at the drawings again, then at her. "I believe you," he said. She didn't smile, but her shoulders dropped slightly, tension easing like air from a sealed jar. A moment passed. Albert walked to a drawer, pulled out a small scanner, and swept it around the office. Still clean. Nothing. Registering. He glanced at the red circle on her map. This room was flagged. She was right, but the tools he trusted didn't show it. He set the scanner down. "Can you show me how you tracked it?" She blinked, surprised. Now. Iris stepped forward. She took a breath. Her voice was steadier now. "It starts in the hallway junction. There's a frequency drift. Low bandwidth, but it spikes when someone enters a room. Almost like motion activation, but network-based. Albert listened, not interrupting. He followed her as she walked, pointed, explained. Her arms loosened. She forgot to be defensive. She started talking faster. Technical, specific, exact. For the first time, he saw her as more than silent and smart. He saw her alive in her own language. When she finished, they returned to the office. Albert sat down slowly. "You built this from scratch. On paper." Iris shrugged, but there was a flicker of pride in her face. "Didn't have permission to install anything." Albert almost smiled. Almost. He looked at her, not just at what she did, but at her. He saw something fragile, not because she was weak, but because she had learned not to expect being seen. He looked down at the paper, then folded it carefully and placed it in a file folder marked with her name. Iris watched him do it, her expression unreadable, but her breathing slowed, just slightly. She turned and started walking to the door. Albert said quietly, "Thank you, Iris. This matters." She paused, one hand on the doorframe. For a second, she looked like she might say something, but instead she nodded, then walked out. The hallway swallowed her quiet steps. Albert leaned back in his chair, rubbing the bridge of his nose. A surveillance system in his own house. Hidden devices he never caught. A child who saw it all before he did. And somehow, the part that bothered him most wasn't the breach of security. It was that for weeks she had been watching, documenting, waiting, and he hadn't noticed her doing it. Outside, the wind picked up brushing against the windows in slow, steady waves. Albert stayed in the chair a little longer, paper still warm from her hands resting near his elbow. Something had shifted. He wasn't sure what it was yet, but it was real, and it wasn't going away. Albert hadn't slept well. He had stayed up late reviewing Iris's notes again, trying to make sense of how a child had noticed something his professional grade systems didn't. The morning light filtered in without his permission, making everything in the office look too clear, too sharp. He found himself pacing before breakfast, something he rarely did. When he finally emerged from his study, he moved through the house, not as its owner, but as someone uncertain of his own footing. Evelyn passed him in the hallway and paused slightly, sensing his disquiet, but said nothing. She had worked in enough homes to know when silence served better than concern. Lilybell sat at the kitchen island, her blonde hair pinned up casually, sipping from a white porcelain mug, as if the morning were like any other. Her back straightened slightly when she saw Albert enter, a reflex she likely didn't notice anymore. He stood across from her, not sitting, not smiling. He waited a beat, then asked, "Have you noticed anything strange with the network at home lately? Any drops in service or odd signals?" Lilybell lowered her cup slowly. "No. Why, is something wrong?" Albert kept his eyes on her, steady but unreadable. "There have been a few anomalies, some devices that don't belong to our system. I just thought I'd ask." She frowned slightly, a measured reaction. "I haven't touched anything. I wouldn't even know how. You know that." He nodded once, but didn't back away. Her gaze lingered on his. "Is this about me, Albert? You think I did something?" "I didn't say that," he said calmly, though his voice carried more weight than usual. Lilybell pushed back her chair. She stood, but didn't approach him. Her voice rose only slightly. "I know I'm not the perfect fit in your world. I don't speak code. I don't think in algorithms. But if you really think I'd try to sabotage you or your house, maybe you never knew me at all." Albert opened his mouth to reply, but she cut him off. "You bring a girl into your life, a child who barely speaks, and suddenly everything changes. You look at me like I'm the outsider now, like I'm the variable." He didn't respond immediately, and in that pause, her voice cracked just enough. "You don't even know what you're accusing me of." "I'm not accusing," he said quietly. "Then what is this A test?" "A loyalty check." Albert stepped back slightly. "I just need to understand what's happening." Her shoulders dropped. She looked genuinely hurt, or at least good at looking it. "God, Albert, do you really think I'd hurt you? Or her?" Upstairs, Iris had been walking down to ask Evelyn for help printing something when she paused on the staircase. She had heard the voices from the kitchen, Lilybell's especially. Iris stood still, hidden behind the wall, just close enough to make out the words. She didn't move, her eyes fixed on the banister. Her ears caught everything. That evening, Albert found the door to Iris's room closed. He knocked softly. No answer. He waited, then knocked again. Still, no sound. Inside, Iris sat cross-legged on the floor, her journal open on her lap. She had heard him. She just didn't want to answer. Her pencil hovered above the paper, then scratched down the words she hadn't said aloud. "I thought he saw me. I thought he meant it. But he still only hears her." Albert stood outside her door longer than he usually would. He considered knocking again. He considered saying something, anything. But no sentence came. Nothing felt like the right start. Eventually, he turned and walked away. Later that night, he returned to his office. The room felt heavier now, not because of danger, but because of the people he had invited into it. He sat at his desk and looked at Iris's drawings again. Then he looked at the log sheet. She had tracked everything. Not just machines, not just signals. She had tracked silence and reactions, and how long he looked at her when she spoke. It wasn't just observation, it was self-preservation. He didn't sleep that night either, not because he feared being watched, but because for the first time he started to wonder if he had been watching back at all. In the morning, Iris came downstairs, already dressed, hair tied in a ponytail she had clearly done herself. She moved quickly past the kitchen and out the back door, leaving her breakfast untouched. Albert saw her but didn't stop her. He knew now that whatever he said would have to be said right, and that kind of saying couldn't be forced. It had to be earned. Evelyn entered the kitchen moments later, carrying a small bundle of herbs. She paused when she saw Albert standing near the window, watching Iris in the backyard. Evelyn said nothing at first, then asked gently, "You want me to talk to her?" Albert shook his head. "No, I need to figure out how to do it myself." Evelyn gave a slight nod. "She's stronger than she looks, but she still needs someone to hold the line." Albert didn't answer. He just kept looking out the window where Iris was sitting on the edge of the garden path, alone, sketching something into the dirt with a stick. The silence in the house wasn't cold now. It was heavy, and inside that weight was the shape of a father who had started too late, and a daughter who had already decided when to stop hoping. Albert spent most of that morning trying to appear normal. He moved through his meetings like someone reading from a script, nodding when expected, offering one-word affirmations, and making note of almost nothing. His mind wasn't in the video calls and the client projections or the threat matrix reviews. His mind was outside where Iris had been sitting alone with a stick in her hand, drawing into the dry dirt like it could answer the things he hadn't said. By noon, he couldn't take it anymore. He excused himself, turned off his monitor, and walked to the kitchen, half hoping she might still be there, but the space was empty except for Evelyn. She was standing by the sink, trimming rosemary with a pair of dull kitchen scissors. The sound of metal scraping against stem had a quiet rhythm, like she had done it the same way for years. She didn't look up when she spoke. She went back out behind the fence, by the trees. Albert nodded, slightly unsure if she meant that as suggestion or judgment. I wanted to ask her if she's okay." Evelyn placed the herbs in a bowl and finally looked at him. "Then maybe don't ask. Just sit." It was advice without pressure. But still, he didn't go. Not yet. He poured himself a cup of coffee he didn't want, stood with it steaming in his hand, then left the kitchen without drinking it. Out behind the fence, Iris was lying on her stomach, near the roots of a tree, a blank page pressed to a clipboard pencil, moving in slow, precise lines. She was mapping again, not the network this time, but something internal, something only she could see. She didn't flinch when the grass behind her rustled softly. Evelyn crouched beside her, slowly, knees creaking. She didn't speak right away. She waited until Iris stopped drawing. "That the garage again?" Evelyn asked, nodding toward the page. Iris didn't look up. "No, just drawing." Evelyn tilted her head. "You know I used to sketch, before my hands got stiff." Iris still didn't speak, but her pencil slowed. "You remind me of someone," Evelyn said. "My niece. Smart girl. Always watching. People thought she was shy, but really she just didn't waste words on nonsense." At that, Iris glanced sideways. "Not much, but enough." I saw her. Evelyn continued, voice softer now. "Lilybell. In the study. Twice last month. Once when you were at school, once when Albert was in Chicago. She had papers in her hand. Didn't hear me come in. Took pictures with her phone." Iris sat up slowly. Her face didn't change, but her pencil dropped into her lap. Evelyn kept her tone level. "I didn't say anything. I wasn't sure what it meant. And to be honest, I've learned not to say things that sound like accusations when you look like me." Iris picked at the corner of her page. "You saw her take pictures clear as day. And I saw a man, too. Late at night. Tall, wore a tan coat. She let him in through the garage. Said his name was Edric." Iris's eyes narrowed. Edric. Evelyn nodded. "Didn't stay long. 10 minutes maybe. But he walked around like he owned the place." Iris flipped through her notes, fingers moving fast now. She stopped on a log with a spike in signal in the hallway, time-stamped with the same week Albert had been out of town. He was here the same night the front camera went dead. Evelyn looked impressed. "You tracked that?" Iris nodded, her voice low but steady. "I thought it was a glitch. Sometimes glitches are warnings that we pretend not to see." They sat in silence for a few moments, just the breeze moving the branches above them. Evelyn pulled something from her sweater pocket, a folded set of papers. She offered them to Iris. "I started writing things down after that night. It's not techie like yours, just memories. Times. What I saw." Iris opened the fold and read quickly. Short entries written in cursive. Tuesday, Lily Bell was on the 3rd floor for no reason. Wednesday, Candace dropped off a black folder but didn't wait for a signature. Thursday, Edric called from the house line but Albert was in meetings. Iris looked up. "You kept all of this?" "Didn't know what else to do. But now you've got your maps. Maybe they need each other." Iris folded the notes carefully and tucked them inside her own logbook. No words, but she nodded. Once. Sharp. Evelyn sighed, stood up slowly. "You're not the only one watching, sweetheart. Some of us have just been quiet too long." As Evelyn walked back to the house, Iris sat still, the new pages on her lap like puzzle pieces falling into place. For the first time since she started logging, she felt like she was part of something. Not fighting a shadow, not chasing ghosts, but gathering proof with someone who knew what it was like to be overlooked, to be underestimated. Back inside, Evelyn passed Albert in the hallway. He looked up, about to speak, but she only said, "You need to talk to her, but let her show you first." He nodded, unsure of the meaning, but didn't stop her. In her room, Iris laid out all her logs, all the drawings, and Evelyn's new additions. She took out colored stickers and began tagging cross-references. Times when Lily Bell's movements didn't match her stories. Gaps when Edric appeared. Entries where Candace bypassed security. She didn't feel angry now, just focused. Like her breath had finally caught up with her heartbeat. And for the first time since she moved into this house, she felt not like a visitor, not like a charity case or a mystery to be tolerated, but like a person who could see the truth and do something with it. She wasn't alone anymore. She had Evelyn. And maybe, just maybe, she wasn't invisible either. Evelyn didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan, the blades whirring slowly like a clock with no numbers. Her mind replayed every detail she had shared with Iris and every detail she hadn't yet. It wasn't that she didn't trust the girl. Quite the opposite. It was that Evelyn knew once you cross a certain line in life, you don't get to go back to just being quiet. The next morning, Evelyn rose before dawn, made tea the way her grandmother had taught her, and set a folded note by Iris's cereal bowl before heading out. She had a meeting. It wasn't formal. The man she was meeting wouldn't be in a suit. He didn't shake hands when they met behind the cafe 2 neighborhoods over. He only nodded, and that was enough. Agent Moore wasn't tall or loud, but his presence filled space. Evelyn remembered him from another house years ago when he came to question a CEO who ended up in the news. Moore had looked her in the eye then, and he did now. "I remember you," he said simply. Evelyn passed him the copied notes, the ones she hadn't shown Iris. She explained what she had seen, not as a frightened bystander, but as a person who had been watching from the margins long enough to know when something stopped being private and started being dangerous. Moore flipped through the pages, reading faster than she expected. When he finished, he said, "If this holds, if we can verify any of it, you understand this doesn't stay small." Evelyn nodded once. "I'm not asking for it to stay anything. I'm just not going to let that little girl go unseen." Moore tucked the papers into his jacket and gave her a direct look. "We'll be in touch." Back at the house, Iris had read the note and gone straight to her room. She pulled up the archive she kept on her private tablet, not the one Albert had given her, but the one she built using old parts from his junk drawer. She typed in the IP string she had memorized from the glitch logs. It took a few minutes, but the ping came back from a familiar domain, a private network masked under the name of a consulting firm. Iris cross-referenced it with Edric Russell's company affiliations, and the overlap blinked on her screen like a beacon. She didn't smile. Instead, she opened the time-stamped security logs from 2 months ago and dragged the video chat metadata into a folder named Evidence. Active. The recipient on the other end of Lily Bell's video calls had been Edric. Iris took a breath. She didn't know what they had discussed, but she didn't need to yet. The link alone proved something Albert hadn't allowed himself to suspect. Iris closed the file and added a note. Not just her. He's involved too. Later that afternoon, Evelyn returned quietly, nodding to Iris as they passed in the hallway. They didn't need words. Iris handed her a printed sheet from the logs. Evelyn read it and tapped twice near the top. "This is what I meant," she murmured. Albert was in his office, back to the door, staring at his monitors. He didn't hear them enter until Evelyn said, "You need to look at something." He turned slowly. When Iris placed the folder on his desk, he saw her face for the first time, not guarded, but resolved. He opened it, expecting childish sketches or numbers that didn't connect. What he found were mapped connections, IP logs, visual timelines, and a list of names: Candace, Edric, Lilybell. "Where did you get this?" he asked, stunned. "We didn't guess," Evelyn said. "We watched. We remembered." Albert sat back, 1,000 thoughts flickering behind his eyes. "Edric. He's my CFO. And he's on Lilybell's call log," Iris added. Albert ran a hand through his hair. He felt the weight of each document. The man he had known since grad school, who had stood beside him when he launched the company, was now tied to the woman his daughter suspected of planting surveillance inside their home. "Candace was here twice last month," Evelyn said. "Didn't sign in. Didn't speak to anyone but Lilybell. She walked past me like I was invisible, like she owned the place." Albert exhaled. "Why wouldn't I know?" Iris answered without anger. "Because you wanted to believe she loved you. That made it easier to not look." He flinched, not because it was rude, but because it was true. He had chosen comfort over scrutiny, and now it was too late to undo what had been allowed. In the days that followed, Albert ran background checks, private audits, and system rescans. He tried to do it without tipping off Edric, but Candace noticed. She asked Evelyn one morning in that clipped tone that assumed Evelyn didn't hear well, or didn't matter. "Is Mr. Lawrence nervous about something? He's been looking at old files. Seems like he's trying to clean house." Evelyn kept her voice steady. "You know how owners get. Always think they missed something." Candace smirked. "Well, maybe he did. Sometimes the problem isn't the house. It's the guests." That night, Evelyn told Albert, not because she thought it was urgent, but because the way Candace said it had reminded her too much of other places, other times when powerful people used polite language like blades. Albert nodded, jaw tight. "Keep your distance from her. She's watching you too closely." Evelyn gave a short, grim smile. "She thinks I don't count. That's my advantage." By the end of the week, Moore had reached back out. He confirmed what Evelyn had feared. The companies paying Edric were linked to data laundering operations flagged by federal intelligence. He asked her if she was willing to testify. She said she'd do more than that. In the house, things grew quieter. Lilybell smiled less. She stopped going into the study. She answered questions with half sentences. And Edric started rescheduling meetings. He said it was travel fatigue budget reviews. But Albert no longer accepted explanations without timelines. Iris, in turn, stopped trying to prove anything. She already had. They were no longer playing defense. Now they were building their case. And this time, Albert was finally listening. Albert stared at the empty room long after Iris and Evelyn had left. The folder still lay open on his desk, its contents spelling out a betrayal so deep it shook something in him he thought long dead. But it wasn't rage that surfaced. It was resolve. He had been blind too long. He wouldn't be again. That night, over dinner that felt stiffer than usual, Iris looked up and said quietly, but clearly, "I think we should let them think they've already won." Evelyn, who had been pouring tea, paused mid-motion. Albert leaned forward, his hand steepled. "Go on." Iris slid her tablet across the table. On the screen was a mock interface, a perfect replica of the company's most sensitive algorithm built by her, but coded to track access points instead of protect data. "We make them believe they're getting the real thing. We leave the bait out in plain sight, but every move they make inside it we see." Albert rubbed his chin, impressed and uneasy. "You want to create a trap?" "No." Iris said, her tone still that of a child, but her posture that of someone far older. "I want them to step into it themselves and believe it's their idea." The plan took 2 days to build, and every moment felt like a test of nerves. Evelyn coordinated the small details: access logs, room rotations, who would be where when. Albert had to pretend he was falling apart, pulling late nights, snapping at staff. But when Iris needed help scripting the metadata decoys to mask the false server, it was Albert who sat beside her, sleeves rolled up, eyes sharp, and focused, offering refinements she hadn't thought of. It was the first time in weeks Iris saw the man she had once secretly hoped would be more than a guardian, not because he raised his voice, but because he chose to sit and build with her. It began with a performance. In the living room, deliberately in front of Lilybell, Albert raised his voice. "I can't keep doing this. I thought this house would bring peace, but it's just noise. It's eyes watching me everywhere." Lilybell, playing the concerned partner, moved to him quickly. "Honey, maybe you just need rest." Albert shoved a document off the table. "Rest. There's a child in this house trying to play spy. A housekeeper who looks at me like she knows something I don't." Iris stood in the hallway within earshot, frozen. Her heart pounded. Even though she knew this was part of the act, the words still stung. Albert continued, pushing just enough emotion into his voice. "You were right. I shouldn't have brought her here. She doesn't belong." Later, Evelyn found Iris sitting on the floor of her room, legs crossed, tablet untouched beside her. The girl didn't cry, but her voice was soft. "He said I don't belong." Evelyn sat beside her. "And you know he didn't mean it." Iris didn't nod. She just whispered, "I know why he said it," but it still sounded real. That night, Lilybell made a call in the garden, just out of reach from house microphones. But Iris had placed a micro-listener behind the bird feeder 3 days ago. Her voice crackled faintly, but clearly. "He's breaking. She's losing it. We need to move now." The next afternoon, Candace appeared. She said it was for budget approvals, but Iris watched from her hidden camera as Candace veered off toward the east wing where the server terminal had been moved. She paused in the hall, narrowing her eyes at a new fixture on the ceiling. It looked like a smoke detector, but it was a relay node. Candace stared, then made a call. Iris muted the audio, but read her lips through the hallway cam feed. "Something's off." She bolted. Iris ran from her room, grabbed her hoodie, and intercepted Candace in the foyer. Her eyes were wide, filled with rehearsed panic. "Candace," she called, slightly breathless. "Do you have a car here? Can you take me? I need to go." "He's going to send me away. He said I don't belong. I can't stay here anymore." Candace blinked, caught off guard. "Albert said that to you." Iris nodded, biting her lip, forcing a tear to slip out. She wasn't sure if it would work. Candace hesitated, then softened slightly. "Sit down. I'll talk to him. He's under stress." Iris sniffled, nodding. "Please don't tell Evelyn I cried. She said I needed to be tough." Candace, half smiling, patted her shoulder and walked off. As soon as she turned the corner, Iris wiped the tear and activated the phone in her pocket. "Stage clear," she whispered. The mic sent the signal directly to Evelyn's secure line. That evening, Evelyn met Moore in a parked sedan 2 blocks from the house. She handed him a flash drive. "They're going to try tonight. That bait server, they're primed for it." Moore slid the drive into a secure slot on his tablet, watched the data load. "This is more than enough. You did good, Miss Evelyn. Better than good." She leaned back, her voice even. "Just make sure they don't twist it around later and say they were the victims." Moore smiled, the kind that didn't reach his eyes. "They won't get the chance." At midnight, Lilybell crept down the stairs in a silk robe, phone tucked into her sleeve, fingers trembling just slightly. She keyed into the study and plugged a small black drive into the terminal. At the same time, Edric walked into his private office downtown, logged into a mirrored terminal, and accessed the same file remotely. They both believed they were winning. On screen, lines of code streamed. Passwords cracked themselves open. The algorithm appeared. But what they didn't see were the silent alerts pinging federal servers. Moore and his team were already in position. They let it play out for 10 minutes, just long enough to record it all. When the doors swung open in both locations simultaneously, neither Lilybell nor Edric had time to close their laptops. Candace, who had been waiting outside in a car, was pulled from the vehicle before she could hit send on her message. Back at the house, Iris stood behind the hallway camera monitor, breath held, watching everything unfold. When the agent in the house gave her a thumbs up, she smiled. Not because it was over, but because for once she had seen it coming and stopped it. Albert, who had been awake in his office pretending to sleep, stepped out quietly, carrying with him a backup drive, not part of the trap, but something he'd prepared separately. It contained weeks of voice recordings, screenshots, documents he'd quietly compiled on Edric's behavior. He walked to Moore and handed it over. "This isn't from Iris, it's from me," he said firmly. "I may have missed it before, but I won't let my company or my family be blindsided again." Moore nodded with newfound respect. "You didn't just clean house, Mr. Lawrence. You built a firewall, Albert turned to where Iris was waiting near the stairs. He looked at her, his eyes full of something complicated and new. "You did it," he said. Iris didn't say anything. She just stepped forward and slowly leaned into him. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. But it was the first time she had allowed herself to believe she belonged there. And this time she did. No one expected the endgame to begin on such an ordinary night. The wind outside was still the sky, overcast but quiet, and the Lawrence house bathed in that soft amber light that made everything look warmer than it really felt. But behind every dimmed hallway, light, and silent door was a plan so tightly wound it left no room for coincidence. Albert stood by the window, not watching the street, but listening to the hum of tension beneath his own skin. He could feel it, the electric pull of resolution approaching, and yet he said nothing. The house was too quiet. That kind of quiet was never natural. It was the silence before something was about to break. Downstairs, Iris sat before her array of makeshift monitors. Her legs dangled off the edge of the stool too short to reach the floor, but her presence carried more weight than anyone else in the room. Evelyn hovered nearby, whispering into her secure comm unit, giving one-word updates to Agent Moore, who sat with his team 3 blocks away. She moved with the steadiness of someone who'd done this before. Years ago, Evelyn had worked in military logistics, coordinating secure comms and sensitive operations, something she rarely mentioned but never forgot. The plan was in motion. The bait server had been triggered hours ago. Now, all they had to do was watch the trap spring shut. Lilybell moved like a ghost through the hallways, her movements graceful, calculated, completely unaware that her every step echoed through Iris's monitors. Her silk robe swayed as she entered the study, pausing just once to look over her shoulder. She plugged in the slim black device and began downloading what she thought was the company's crown jewel. At the same time, in an office suite downtown, Edric leaned back in his chair, sipping scotch as lines of code scrolled across his screen. He wore that same smug confidence Albert had seen too many times before, the look of a man who believed the world owed him victory. Albert watched both feeds from the guest room eyes darting between the live footage and the small black recorder in his hand. This was the final move, but instead of the relief, he expected to feel something else sat in his chest, something heavier. Pride, yes, but also the weight of a mistake that had festered for too long. He turned when Evelyn entered, silently nodding once to signal all systems were green. "She's steady," she whispered, "but her breathing's fast." "I know," Albert said. "She's braver than I ever was." Back at the screen, Iris adjusted her earpiece and leaned closer. Lilybell had just bypassed the final firewall. The false algorithm opened like a gift box, beautiful on the outside but hollow on the inside. What neither she nor Edric could see was the invisible trail of breadcrumbs coded into every line, every click, every keystroke. Within seconds, their attempts had activated 5 federal warrants. Agent Moore's voice came through Evelyn's line. "We have lock-in. Go for simultaneous." It happened fast. At Edric's office, the door burst open with controlled force. Agents swarmed in. Edric tried to slam the laptop shut, but it was too late. "You're under arrest for corporate espionage, wire fraud, and attempted sabotage," the lead agent announced as Edric's glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. Meanwhile, in the Lawrence house, Lilybell turned at the sudden creak behind her. Iris, watching through the hallway camera, saw the look of confusion turn to panic as armed agents entered. "No," Lilybell shouted. "You don't understand. I was protecting him. I was saving him." Iris flinched. Not because of Lilybell's voice, but because of how familiar that desperation sounded. She had felt it once when no one listened. Now, someone finally did, and it wasn't Lilybell. Candace, who had been parked across the street, noticed the sudden flurry of movement. She reached for her phone, but before she could tap the screen, a dark sedan pulled up, and 2 agents emerged swiftly, pulling her door open. "Ma'am, step out of the vehicle." "What is this?" "I'm an executive. I have rights." "Yes. And now you also have charges," one replied flatly. "We have you on coordination and obstruction." At the command center, Evelyn let out a long breath, her fingers trembling slightly as she muted her mic. "All targets secure," she said. Iris didn't smile. She just leaned back, fingers still curled tight around the edge of her desk. Her eyes were dry, but her heart pounded so hard it hurt. Albert came in moments later, his face a mixture of relief and conflict. "It's over," he said. Iris turned toward him, her voice quiet. "Is it?" He walked over, knelt down beside her chair. For them, yes. For us, not yet. But this is the beginning. Agent Moore arrived at the house 15 minutes later. He shook hands with Albert first, firm and respectful. Then he turned to Iris. "You're the reason this worked," Moore said. "We've had moles like Edric before, but never a witness who could see the whole board this early. That server trap brilliant. The data logs infallible." Iris blinked, caught off guard. "I just wanted to help." "You did more than that," Moore replied. "You made us believe no one is too small to see the whole game." Evelyn watched from the side, her expression warm but guarded. She knew what this meant for Iris: validation, yes, but also attention. And attention could be dangerous. Albert stepped forward, holding out a thick file folder. "Here's the rest. Logs I kept. Things I didn't even show Iris. I wasn't blind, I was in denial. I let friendship blind me." Moore took the folder, flipping through it quickly. "This fills in the blanks. You built a case while they thought you were falling apart." Albert nodded. "No one else was going to protect this family. So I did." He turned to Iris then. "You didn't just help me. You saved me. Not just from them, but from myself." Iris didn't reply right away. She walked to him, wrapped her small arms around his waist, and for the first time since she arrived in that house, Albert leaned down without hesitation, embracing her fully. It wasn't awkward or forced. It was real, solid, earned. Albert held her a little tighter, then whispered just loud enough for her to hear, "I didn't bring you here to make myself look good, Iris. I just didn't know how to be a father at first. And somehow, you taught me." For the first time, Iris didn't question it. She believed it. Every word. Agent Moore looked away respectfully, then said to Evelyn, "You've got a good team here. Strange, but good." Evelyn smiled faintly. Strange tends to survive longer. The night ended with no champagne, no celebration, just quiet. Moore's team packed up evidence. Evelyn reset the security protocols. Albert reviewed what Iris had logged, and Iris, in her room, finally allowed herself to cry. Not out of fear or frustration, but out of relief. The kind that only came when you weren't waiting for someone to knock your world off balance anymore, because you had built it steady yourself. And this time, when she looked around her room and heard footsteps approaching, she didn't brace herself. She didn't hide the tears. Because when Albert appeared in the doorway holding 2 mugs of cocoa, he said only one thing. "No more secrets. Deal." Iris nodded. "Deal." The morning after the arrest felt nothing like a victory parade. There were no press conferences, no loud announcements, no crowds cheering behind velvet ropes. The world outside continued its quiet rhythm, as if unaware that a major breach in corporate security and a deeply personal betrayal had just been unraveled and stopped in its final hour. Inside the Lawrence home, the air felt different, lighter. Not cheerful, but less burdened, like the storm had passed and left behind a clarity that could only come after something hard and honest had finally been spoken aloud. Albert sat at the kitchen table, reading through legal documents in silence. His eyes were tired, but there was a softness in them that hadn't been there before. Iris sat across from him, knees pulled to her chest on the chair, sipping cocoa with both hands. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. There was a stillness between them, not awkward, but settled. The kind of silence that only came when 2 people had finally started to understand each other, not as parts of a forced picture, but as something real. Later that day, a social services representative arrived. Her name was Miss Jordan, a tall woman with gentle eyes and a clipboard that seemed too heavy for the moment. She spoke quietly, kindly, asking Iris simple questions to confirm her willingness to proceed with the adoption. Iris answered with nods at first, then with her voice steady but soft. Albert sat beside her through it all, not as a shield, but as a presence. When asked to sign the papers, his hand trembled only once. He paused before finishing the last signature and looked at Iris. "You sure?" Iris looked back, her voice clear. "Are you?" Albert smiled, not a performative smile, not a smile for cameras or courtrooms, but a real one, more than ever. And when it was done, when Miss Jordan packed up the final forms and left them with a thin folder that now legally declared them family, Iris didn't say a word. She just reached out and took Albert's hand, her small fingers curling around his. He squeezed gently, and for the first time she didn't pull away. In the following days, news of the arrest began to surface in measured doses. Candace and Edric were both being held without bail. The charges were extensive wire fraud, corporate espionage, and conspiracy. Federal investigators revealed that Lily Bell's true identity was Kara Moore, a long-standing intelligence asset for a private international tech firm with a history of shadow operations in North America. She was being extradited to face charges abroad, and the headlines called her a chameleon, a master manipulator, a ghost. Albert declined all interview requests. He issued one statement through his company's legal team, expressing disappointment, accepting responsibility for his failure to detect the breach sooner, and emphasizing that the future of the company would rest in stronger, more accountable hands. And that wasn't just for the public. Inside the company, real changes were being made. Evelyn was promoted officially not to house staff, but to senior trust advisor, a position created to give her authority in reviewing personnel integrity and cybersecurity protocol. Her new badge with her name etched cleanly across brushed steel came with full access and a seat at the weekly executive briefings. The security architecture itself was rebuilt. This time, Iris was allowed to contribute. Carefully, under Albert's watchful eye, and with Evelyn present, she introduced her notes on passive breach signals, and together they devised a secondary monitoring layer, coded by Albert, tested by Iris, and documented by Evelyn. It wasn't just protection, it was evolution. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the walls gold, Iris wandered into Albert's office holding a piece of mail. It was a handwritten letter, no return address. She handed it to him without saying a word. He opened it slowly. Inside was a note written in shaky, cramped handwriting. Dear Iris, I saw what happened on TV. I'm 10. My foster family doesn't believe me, but I think someone is spying on me too. You made me feel less alone. Thank you for not being quiet. R. Albert looked up. Iris stood with her hands behind her back, not moving, eyes fixed on the floor. You get a lot of these? He asked gently. She nodded. 2 yesterday. 1 from Canada. He didn't smile this time. He didn't speak either. He just leaned over and pulled open the drawer to his right, revealing a stack of similar letters. Then he handed her a manila folder. Let's start something then, something that doesn't stop with us. She opened the folder and found the preliminary charter of what would become the Iris Foundation, a nonprofit initiative aimed at supporting children impacted by digital surveillance, especially those in underrepresented communities. The first mission to advocate for responsible tech in foster systems and shelters where devices often went unchecked. Later that week, during a quiet lunch on the back patio, Evelyn sipped iced tea and looked over at the two of them. You know, she said slowly, you both changed each other. And that's rare. Most people just pass through each other's lives without leaving anything behind. Albert gave a small nod. We didn't plan this, but sometimes the best parts of your life sneak in the side door. Iris picked up a napkin and folded it meticulously before saying, I thought you only wanted to adopt me to look good. Albert blinked. Then he set his glass down and leaned forward. I thought I did too at first. Then I met you. And I realized it wasn't about making me look good. It was about making me better. There was a long pause. Not heavy, not awkward, just real. Evelyn smiled. And that, she said, is why we're still standing. That night, Iris placed a sticker on her computer. Nothing worth keeping hides in the dark. She didn't say where she got it. Maybe it came with one of the letters. Maybe she printed it herself. Either way, it stayed there. And when the house finally went quiet, not with tension, but with calm, Albert stood in the hallway for a moment before turning off the lights. As he passed Iris's door, he saw the soft glow under the crack. She was still awake. He knocked once. Yeah, her voice came. He pushed open the door gently. She was at her desk, reading over the foundation documents, a pen in her hand glasses slipping slightly down her nose. Bedtime, he said. Almost done, she replied. He crossed the room, kissed her on the head, and pointed to the small plaque on her bookshelf. That's yours now. Not just the name, but everything that comes with it. Iris looked up. Lawrence isn't just a name. It's where I became someone who mattered. Albert stood silent for a beat. Then, with a warm voice, said, Best decision I never planned. She laughed. He laughed too. And in that laugh, in that quiet room, with nothing but soft light and paperwork between them, the final line of separation faded. They were a family. Not perfect, not traditional, but real. And real was enough. No one had imagined that a child who barely reached the height of a doorknob would end up sitting before an FBI panel with confidence in her voice and calm in her spine. But Iris Lawrence wasn't most children. A year had passed since the night Lilybell and Edric had been arrested, and life had reshaped itself in subtle but powerful ways. It hadn't been loud or cinematic. There were no dramatic speeches, no music swelling behind her steps, just steady progress, quiet but undeniable, like the way seeds grow in silence and still somehow break through concrete. On the morning of her recognition, Iris wore a soft gray sweater and navy jeans, her curls tucked neatly under a wool beret Evelyn insisted made her look like a young congresswoman. Albert waited outside the room, not hovering, just present. Not once did he offer a speech or lecture or a proud parent's monologue. Instead, when she walked out holding the citation letter from the bureau, he asked, "Are you okay?" She nodded, handed him the folded envelope, and said, "They want to make me an advisor." He raised an eyebrow. "Is that legal?" She grinned. "They said they'd make it work." That was Iris. Not pushing, not demanding, just doing what was necessary and letting the world catch up. Back at home, Agent Moore stopped by with the paperwork and a gift. It was a framed print of her original surveillance map, cleaned up and digitized, but still clearly hers, labeled in her handwriting. At the bottom, a gold plate read, "The first to see the whole board." Evelyn placed it in the hallway between Albert's framed Patton Awards and a photo of Iris with her new team at the Iris Foundation. What began as a side folder of letters and incident reports had now grown into something far more powerful. With funding from private donors, public grants, and Albert's quiet but unwavering backing, the foundation had launched 2 national awareness campaigns. They trained school counselors, worked with foster care networks, and most importantly, created a secure app where children could report digital abuse without fear of dismissal. One afternoon during an interagency meeting, a woman named Nadine stood up. She was tall, mid-30s, black, and soft-spoken. She had been a caseworker for 15 years and never once cried in public. But that day, her voice cracked as she read a message sent through the foundation's hotline. "My phone isn't mine anymore. My foster dad watches everything. I thought it was my fault. But now I know it isn't. Thank you for listening." She looked at Iris seated near the back with a notepad in her lap. "That's your doing," she said. "We were deaf until you made us listen." Iris lowered her eyes, not out of shame, but because she still hadn't grown used to being seen that way. She wasn't chasing glory. She just wanted to make it stop for herself and for every kid who hadn't yet found the courage to whisper what they knew. In the quieter rhythms of life, the Lawrence household had changed too. Albert didn't work past midnight anymore. He came home early, cooked dinner with Evelyn, even if it meant setting off the smoke alarm every other Thursday. He asked Iris about her day, and meant it. Not like an obligation, but like someone genuinely curious. He no longer called her kiddo with awkward hesitation. Now it was always followed by a side hug or a soft pat on the back. One Friday evening, Iris found a wrapped box on her bed. No tag, no occasion. Inside was a toolkit, sleek, compact, and engraved with the initials IL. When she walked into the living room, Albert was trying and failing to assemble a new bookshelf. He looked up. "I figured if you're going to keep out-coding my staff, you might as well have your own tools." She rolled her eyes. "You know I like soldering. This is for hardware, not coding." He winked. "Then build me something better. This shelf is a disgrace." They laughed, the kind of laugh that didn't carry weight behind it, only warmth. That fall, Evelyn took her first vacation in 20 years. She went to New Mexico to visit her sister, leaving the house in Iris and Albert's hands. When she returned, she found the pantry organized alphabetically, the plants overwatered, and a hand-drawn note on her pillow that read, "You deserve to rest too. We didn't burn anything. Much." One evening in November, Iris was invited to speak at a youth tech summit. The room was filled with teenagers, some gifted, some just curious. Her speech wasn't rehearsed. She walked to the podium with her hands in her pockets and began, "I'm not a genius. I'm not even the smartest in my class. But I paid attention. I saw something wrong and said something, and people listened. That's it. That's the whole story." She paused, looked around the room, and added, "If you're waiting to be older, richer, or smarter before you speak up, don't. The right time is when it starts feeling wrong." A standing ovation wasn't her goal, but she got one anyway. Back at home that night, Albert sat on the edge of her bed as she wiped off her makeup. "You're not the same girl I met," he said softly. She shrugged. "I don't feel different." "You are. Not because of what you did, but because of who you became after. That's harder." She set the towel down. "You too, you know." He blinked. "Me?" Yeah, you're not afraid of being soft anymore. That used to scare you. He chuckled. Still does. But I'm learning. That winter, a new letter arrived. This one from a parent, a father. My daughter caught someone trying to install spyware on her school tablet. She used your checklist. She's 9. We owe you more than thanks. Albert framed it, hung it in the hallway. They called that wall the garden, because from things once buried, something had grown. A year later, the Iris Foundation received federal recognition, not just for innovation, but for impact. Iris gave a short speech. This time, she wore a navy blazer and stood taller, not because she had grown, but because she had settled into her own name. I used to think I had to prove something, she said, but now I know the truth. I was always enough. I just needed someone to believe it with me. When she stepped down, Albert hugged her tight, not as a formality, as a father, one who had once stood in the doorway of his life and almost missed the miracle standing right there in the dark. And so, from the unlikeliest beginning, an 8-year-old whispering into the silence of a house too quiet, too watched, came something no one expected. Not a revolution, not fame, just change. One honest moment at a time. From weeds, a garden. From a whisper, a voice. From a child, a legacy. Her name was Iris Lawrence, and the world was listening. And if you've stayed with us all the way through this journey, thank you, truly. Stories like Iris's remind us that even in the quietest corners of the world, a good little girl with courage and heart can change everything. These aren't just tales of betrayal and justice. They're stories of emotional healing, of kindness, in the face of doubt, of rising beyond what the world expects from someone small. Whether you found yourself inspired, moved, or simply reflective, we're grateful you chose to spend your time here. We'd love to hear what this story meant to you, your thoughts, your tears, your anger, your hope, and tell us, where in the world are you watching? From knowing this story reached you wherever you are, gives it life beyond the screen. We'll see you in the next chapter of these heartwarming, inspiring stories. Until then, stay kind, stay brave, and never underestimate the power of a good little girl.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.